Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I'm on chess.com and I'm going to review a game by a friend of mine on the site. This was a 10-minute game played between two players of approximately 1600, a 1600 rating. And I found it quite interesting. It's a game that seems natural enough, many natural looking moves, but many points to make in this one. There are many details in the early stage with regard to pawn structure that I'd like to point out. And as things start to heat up come middle game, these natural moves are still present, and many tactical oversights are missed in the midst of these natural-looking moves. I found it quite interesting. I spent quite some time, in fact, prior to doing this recording here, reviewing this game with the computer. So let's dive right in and see what we can take away from this one, where we have the game kicking off with e4, d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, knight d7. Black aims for a Philidor defense, establishing a strong point on e5, knight f3, sure enough e5, and now d takes e, d takes e. So far so good, right? We're just 5 moves in. Any issues with what has been played? Seems natural enough, but there is an issue, at least in my eyes. This decision here to capture on e5 is a mistake. Maybe that term is a bit too strong. It is not best to capture on e5, that is for sure. Out of curiosity, I looked at this very capture, this position right here, as white, to see what Stockfish recommends. I looked, I had the computer look at the top 20 best moves from this position as white. And where does d takes e5 rank? 18th. At about depth 22. Why is it not such a fan of this capture? Well, let's see. As it stands right now, white has a better pawn presence in the center. 2 pawns of rank 4 versus black's 1 pawn of rank 4. White has a better pawn presence in the center. By making this capture, white gives that up. White has given up their 4th rank pawn for black's 3rd rank pawn. There are some other details that come about as a result of this exchange, but regarding the pawn structure, it is now completely balanced, and white basically has no advantage as by making this capture so soon, at least. It's better to maintain the tension. That's one way to look at it, seeing it as white having 2 4th rank pawns versus this one 4th rank pawn. That's one way to view it. Another is to recognize the potential that each pawn has within this, with regard to this tension. As it stands right now, white has a d4 pawn that can do a few things. It can move forward, it can capture, it can simply sit. Okay? Whereas black has the options of only capturing and sitting. Does not have as many options. It's better to keep those options in your back pocket. This isn't to say that d5 is a fantastic move, or that it would really ever be played, but it's better to keep the tension, keep those possibilities available to you as white. We can go one step further, looking at now what exactly happens after this capture and how black benefits as a result of this. There is no longer a pawn on d6. What does this mean for the bishop on f8? Nice things. 2 new possibilities are now available. So, many reasons we have now to avoid such a capture. But it happens. D takes, and now bishop c4. So, instead of the capture, this move right away would have been better. Pointing at a vulnerable point on f7, and, well, developing, preparing to castle. So we had the capture, and only then bishop c4, h6. This is another point I want to make. This is not necessary to keep the knight out of g5. I imagine Black has experienced some issue with a knight and a bishop converging on f7, but it is not something that you need to do. Black in this position can simply get on with developing. Bishop to b4 comes to mind, bishop c5. As it stands right now, the knight is pinned at some point. Maybe knight takes e is an idea, or some combination of the damaging of the queenside structure. h6 is not needed in this position. Black can do well to save a move. h6 is not necessary. How about get on with developing a new piece? Let's say bishop to b4 and knight here. We would have simply castles. I'd like to examine this just a little bit more thoroughly, this idea of the bishop and knight converging on this f7 square. Even in the situation where the tension is maintained, I had pointed out instead of capturing bishop c4 is better. So let's examine this. Bishop c4. This is still a fine move to simply develop. And it may seem very scary what I'm about to show you, but do know that in both variations that I show, Black will be the preferred side. It gets quite complicated, but White is in no way better in these two variations that I show. And I'm going to go through these two so that as the Black player, you don't have to play this h6 move. I want to draw your attention to you could save yourself this move as Black with stopping the knight from coming to g5. It's not needed. Okay. If bishop e7 is played, this might be something that scares you as Black. Bishop takes, king takes, knight g5, king here. This is all quite forced. These are many moves deep that I'm going through, but in the end, Black is the better side. This knight has come quite a ways. f3, g5, e6, c7, and then he's going to nab the rook in the corner. Queen g6. The rook can be captured, but hang on. Whose king is more vulnerable? Rook here. Takes. This is all forced. Queen needs to take. And now we have a new piece coming in to e5, threatening a fork, and a bishop now available to take part in this attack. White has to be very delicate. f3 is an only move, and now we have ideas like bishop h3, and even some idea connected with knight to g4, knight f to g4, and maybe it's White all of a sudden who needs to be very, very careful. That's one idea in mind. I know that was a very long-winded variation with bishop c4, bishop e7, and then allowing this knight g5 move, or excuse me, bishop takes and then knight g5. Let me just show you one other way that can spring about. Suppose instead of bishop takes f7 right away, knight g5, well, now we can castle. And still there is this idea by White to capture on f7 with the bishop. And after rook takes, knight to e6, which seems very annoying still. Queen here. It's an only move for the queen. Now, yet again, there's a fork. Unfortunately, the queen cannot come out in this way, but she can play queen d8. And soon enough, this knight will be picked up with bishop to b7, and this knight is maybe even going to have to find a new home. It could be kicked at some point. So these are a couple variations to be familiar with. I know it looks maybe a little bit scary, but I wanted to highlight these because I see this h6 move. It's one that's recommended by the computer. It's one of the moves that will pop up in this position for for black, this idea of h6, but bishop e7 is fine, and I see no reason not to go forward with bishop to e7. You could even do some work of your own on the black end and be familiar with those complicated positions, because I could see many players going straight in for this knight g5 and a focus on that f7 square. Anyhow, some things you may want to review. So we had the capture in this game. h6 was played, castles, so some pretty natural moves here. Bishop e7, I might, as black, want to make use of one of these two squares. I may, as black, want to play queen to e7 at some point, so maybe bishop to c5 or b4 is an idea. But bishop e7 is fine. Nothing, not too bad of a move. Just preparing to castle. Rook to e1, I'm not really a fan of this. A better way to organize is queen e2 and then rook on an open file. So as it stands right now, it's a closed file to closed file type of move. I really don't see the need for this move. Rook to e1 better is probably queen e2 and rook to d1. Okay, rook e1, c6. This is a very common move, and it's one that does a good job in restricting the knight on c3. There's no d5 or b5 jumping points now. This is an interesting position for the knight on c3, by the way. It's a developed piece. It's a developed piece, but one that is, in a way, out of play due to this pawn on c6. It's like he has to retreat before he can think about doing something in the forward. So yeah, this is a very common move. c6. It's not only there to restrict the knight, but also provide a little gap, a hole there for the queen to develop. a4 is quite a natural reply to prevent these this queenside expansion. a4 is essentially securing the position of both bishop and knight. They can't be so easily rattled now with b5 and maybe b4 at some point. So a4, castles. a5. I could see myself playing this move, a5. I believe I have done this in maybe like a blitz game before, and it's a mistake to do this move. I think the idea is, for one, to not allow black, let's say, another opportunity to maybe clamp down on this b4 square, which may turn out to be a fine home for a piece. And yeah, I think that's one of the main ideas behind playing a5 here in white's eyes. And another is to, let's say, stop this pawn from stop the b7 pawn from moving so easily. You know, you can't do b6 or b5 because of the capture, and well, the rook, for the moment at least, is unprotected. But a5 is a mistake because of what exactly? Because black has this option of playing bishop to b4, and this is a tremendous piece, exerting just an enormous pressure here. The knight is pinned, it's opposite the rook, and what are you doing about your a5 pawn? It's difficult to say. It seems like he's going to be picked up. If the pawn moves forward, well, black simply plays b5, grabs some space, does so with tempo, and maybe at some point, let's say after queen c7, knight c5 can be quite disruptive, looking to really destroy white's queenside structure. So my point here is that a5 is no good. What would be better? Let's say queen to e2. I'm still recommending this rook get on the d file. This is certainly a better square, but queen to e2 comes to mind. A move like h3. Curiously enough, this bishop on c1, it's tough to say where exactly it belongs. This might be a good square at some point, but I do have some concern of knight g4 rattling the position, questioning its position on e3. So this is maybe a sensible move, h3, queen to e2, and then maybe bishop to e3, just to give you a little bit of an idea for how white could maybe move forward here in a better way instead of a5. a5 is on board. Bishop b4 is what black should do, but instead plays a6. And I'm not quite sure why black did this. Maybe there was some fear of, hey, I don't want him to go forward any more. But the drawbacks connected with a6 is just too much. This gap on b6, this hole on black's queenside, is one that you can very easily see taken advantage of by the white minor pieces. Bishop e3 comes to mind, some combination of the knight swinging into b6, and it's a little bit far-fetched, but it's certainly an idea for a knight to reroute, this f3 knight to reroute and pivot on the c4 square. And this b6 square can really end up hurting black. This really should not be a fear. If it was in black's eyes, it shouldn't be, because on any a6 move, the b5 move hits. Let's just say queen c7 is played. This would, let's say, be, well, I already pointed out bishop b4 would be better, but let's just say queen c7 was played. If a6 is played, it's as if white spent all these tempi, 1, 2, 3, 3 moves, to do what exactly? Initially, a4 was done to prevent b5. a5 was there to, well, grab a little bit more space and still prevent b5. And now a6 hits. And in the end, 3 tempi was spent to do what exactly? Really nothing. It's certainly a pawn with some depth. There may be an idea where, okay, if this pawn is ever dropping on a7, he's really close to queening, but it's really not worth the time invested. I don't think you can justify all these tempi, or all these moves, and in the end, black is able to play b5, one shot, grab some space, and your pieces are getting kicked around. Okay. Lost my breath a little bit on that one. Okay. So we didn't have queen c7, instead a6. So how to take advantage of maybe the b6 squares is a question to have here. What was played? h3, not a bad move. But should probably get on with some more development here. Bishop to e3 might be an idea here. And in fact, on h3, there's still this idea of bishop to b4 at this point for black, but it never really hits. Instead of h3, what white can do, and it seems very awkward, I know, this somewhat half-developing type of move, deploying the bishop, just improving its position just by 1 rank. But this is aimed, this bishop d2 move has an aim to reinforce the a5 pawn. Maybe permitting knight to a4 now, focusing on the b6 and also c5 squares. If bishop d2 and bishop b4, there's the move knight to b1, taking measures against the a5 pawn, maintaining the a5 pawn. And if we have the capture, well, we can look to reposition the knight finally. Maybe he's now coming into b3, or the bishop is backing up and then going to c4. And if it's avoided, this exchange of the dark square bishops, we could have bishop to c3 and maybe start to exert some pressure on the e5 pawn with yet another minor piece. It's a little bit awkward for sure, this position as white, trying to cope, in other words, with this idea of bishop b4 and hunting down this maybe a bit overextended a5 pawn, but yeah, it's just something to bear in mind here. This idea of bishop to b4, bishop d2 is a better move instead of h3 at this moment. Okay, so we did have h3, queen c7, natural enough. Bishop e3, focusing on this square, b6, c5, rook to d8. I have a quick pop quiz for you here. What is this move or excuse me, what do you think about when this move is played? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video, see what things you come up with. What do you think about after the move Rook D8 is played? Okay. Well, for one, it's opposite the queen, and what's going to be natural enough is a move like queen to e2, and that was what was played. So it's opposite the queen. You may have been saying to yourself, well, black is threatening. You may have been saying to yourself, well, what is it doing? It's preparing to move the knight with a discovered attack, maybe on f8 or c5, and looking to then reposition on e6 and jump into d4, things of that nature. This square d4 is one that needs to be taken care of. But one other thing to bear in mind is with this move, what is it no longer doing? Questioning what moves do and no longer do is important. It no longer defends f7, and we may already start to train our eye to view the f7 square as if it is unprotected, since it has one attacker and one defender. Okay, what does black do next? Knight c5. If I were to ask that same question again, what are you thinking about when this move is played? What would you come up with? Well, in this position, it's positioning a knight on a square that is unprotected. One attacker, one defender. Another unprotected pawn, one attacker, one defender. Unprotected pieces leads to tactics, and sure enough, there is now a tactic. If we're able to train our eye to view the position like this in situations where, okay, sure, this rook in the corner, he's unprotected, but in situations where there's one attacker, one defender, two attackers, two defenders, those two are unprotected. And there's a tactical shot here that white could have gone forward with, but didn't. Knight a4, instead focusing on b6, welcoming a trade of knights. Knight takes, rook takes. But what was the tactic here that was missed? Bishop takes f7, king takes, bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, and now finally taking advantage of the unprotected piece on c5 with the fork. White is probably, I think the evaluation was saying about a pawn and a half advantage. So, tough position here for black for sure. Material plus for white, and yeah, just a tactical, or a missed tactic right there. But being aware of these deficiencies, being aware of what moves do and no longer do. f7 is vulnerable. When the knight plays into c5, this is an unprotected square. Two unprotected squares, at least, on black's side right here. How can we take advantage of these? Well, we just saw the combination of f7, c5, and then queen c4. Okay. Instead it was knight a4, chop chop, knight d7. That's a pretty natural thing. Knight d7 looking to reposition on c5, or maybe even, again, focusing on one of these two squares. A knight on e6 would maybe be a pretty good piece. But I think the main aim with this knight d7 move is to watch over the b6 square, right? Because after this recapture, rook takes a4, bishop to b6 is threatened, winning material. So black covers that. b4. This secures c5. This is quite a natural move to watch over the c5 square. It's a restricting type of move. It's not considered best here. I think one idea is to already reposition the rook. I mean, the only reason right now he is on the a4 square was because he needed to recapture. But aside from that, he should probably get back in the ball game and reroute. Get back to being connected, let's say. Get into a4. A better move is maybe even to reroute the knight, looking to back up the bishop and then get into the c4 square, still having some focus on b6, but getting this knight into play at this moment, or retreating the rook. These are different ideas. Okay. We had b4. Bishop f6, and now white looks to reposition the knight. I would still go, and this is just getting a little bit technical here, but of these two pieces, it's the rook that really needs to get in a better position. Again, he's only here on a4 due to a recapture, so he's currently out of play. I mean, there's no moves laterally or forward, so he should look to retreat. Rook a to a1. And I say this because, at least for the moment, the knight on f3 exerts some pressure on the center and in some sense is restricting the black pieces. I know this is a pawn that is reinforced a ton. Three pieces on that square as defense. Plenty of defense for e5, but still, maintaining the tension on the e5 square for at least one more move is probably best. Running immediately to reposition the worst place piece, which I identify as the rook on a4, is best. Okay. Knight h2. White holds an advantage here, and it's because of the pawn structure on the queen side due to this space advantage on b6, which is nice to have here. These having this control over b6 is really having a strong influence on black completing their development. You know, how do you move this bishop? You need to move your knight or your pawn first, and if you're moving your knight, you have this hitting, so it's a bit uncomfortable for black to untangle and complete development on the queen side. But black finds a way to complete development on the queen side. b5 hits. A takes b, knight takes, bishop takes. White is still the preferred side. I know black is playing with the bishop pair, but I don't know how great this bishop is on f6. Additionally, this structure is now split as a result of b5. After a takes b, it's the heart that has just been taken out for the black queenside structure, and with that comes now two weak links, two isolated pawns, the a pawn and the c pawn. Bishop takes, queen takes, and now we have white focusing their attention on a6. This is bound to fall. How many attackers? 4 attackers, only 3 defenders, so this is an issue for black, how to defend a6. And you know, if we just go one step back, this is yet another, for concrete reasons, this is another reason to return the rook. I was just kind of giving some general advice here. Which of these two pieces do you look to reposition at this moment? For concrete reasons, this is another reason to go forward with rook to a4, so that on this b5 move, a takes b, knight takes b, well, I would no longer be in a fork if my rook isn't on a4, and I could think about maintaining my bishops and simply playing against the one main imbalance in this position. There's no bishop pair you're fighting against, or there's no bishop pair advantage that black has in this position, but instead it's white playing against simply the weaknesses on the black queen side, the a and c pawns. Okay. Knight h2, b5, chop, 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 queen b6, white doubles, bishop b7, c3. White is not so quick to cash out on this a6 square. In the end, black can scoop up the b4 pawn. So going straight in for these exchanges, in the end, white gets this guy here. I guess white could scoop this pawn up like so, but black is certainly not without their activity. Maybe a rook getting to the 7th, or a queen check, and then maybe even the rook coming to d1 is something that would scare white. So not so fast to cash out and grab that a6 pawn. Instead, slowly improving the position is white with this c3 move. c5, knight g4, takes, rook takes. This is a nice recapture, throwing an immediate punch, pressure on the bishop. As it stands right now, after queen c7, this queen is restricted. Yeah, tough to suggest something here, in fact. After this after this recapture, this queen is a bit overloaded, is she not? She has to defend both bishops, but, the b7 bishop, can't do both, right? You can't, let's say, maintain your kingside structure now, and, you lose a piece. If, let's say, queen to c6, knight takes bishop here, you can't take with the queen because of rook takes bishop. So, this was probably not best here by black to capture on b4. A better move, I'm not quite sure. Black is in a difficult position, and it's very difficult to suggest something for black. They're in a tough spot. This b5 move this earlier b5 move to untangle and complete queenside development saddles black with these deficient pawns and a bishop that's not looking so happy. Moving this pawn opens the door for the bishop, but at the same time is placing yourself making the queen, let's say, a little bit more vulnerable after this capture on b5, and there's a tremendous amount of activity by the white pieces. The white rooks are coming to life. This knight is excellent, hitting the bishop. He can't go to a different square without dropping e5. It's a tough position. In the computer's eyes, it's close to a pawn and a half advantage for white already. So, yeah, tough to suggest something here for black. The improvements were really much earlier. We didn't have rook d7. We had the capture, queen c7, and now knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight, and now how to finish off black here. As soon as this structure is on board, the queens are still present, how to take advantage of the king position. Queen f3 pinpoints one of the weaknesses. A better idea is to give an immediate check or even sweep into h5, move more forward. Playing to h5 puts pressure on both h6 and f7, so why not go there? And let's say keep a check on g4 in your back pocket. Queen f3, though, not a bad move. King g7 to defend, now a check. And now queen back to f3. White should think more about moving forward. Instead of f3, position the queen finally in black's position. Threaten f5, threaten maybe queen h7. And then there's some new possibilities of queen to h8, forcing the king towards the center, maybe picking the pawn up on h6 with check. So this would be better to simply move forward. This is the type of position it is on board, one where we really shouldn't be retreating. It's our opponent's king, our black's king here is on their heels. They're vulnerable. We have the safer king. We should really be much more attentive to looking at these forward moves. The forward moves are usually the more forcing. So we didn't have queen f5, but rather queen f3, a5, which allows rook takes bishop. And this is a good move, this sacrifice of the rook, but it's played with the wrong intention. White gives up the exchange, only then to try and get it back with bishop to d5, and there was something that was overlooked with this move. Bishop d5 was played here, but what is best after the sacrifice of the rook is to capture on f6, and there's just a great amount of activity that the queen now has, pointing at e5, h6, a new check is available on h8, there's pressure on f7, the queen is now restricted to defending f7. This is a better approach here, to give up the exchange and then smash through on the f6 square. It's quite difficult to even prevent queen to h8 or queen takes h6. These ideas are difficult to defend against. King to g8, sidestepping queen h8 is not really defending because white can take advantage of this pin and then scoop up h6 with check next. So this would have been better here, to give up the rook and then take on f6, but white had it in their mind to give up some material and then look to get it back with this skewer. But it's not really working out because black can do what? Black can take advantage of an unprotected piece, queen to b2. So on bishop takes rook, there's first queen takes rook with check, and only then the recapture. And after the smoke clears, let me just show you. After the smoke clears, we would have what exactly? Black being up a full rook. So this idea was missed with the queen coming to b2, but still, you know, it's not just this move queen to b2 that was missed, but rather the idea is really off. Even if this wasn't an idea, let's just say the rook was on f1 secure and some in-between move like queen to b2 wasn't present, this is still really not a good idea to give an exchange only then to try and get the material back. White should be looking to keep some material on the board, look to exploit the king position better, and this would have been the way to do it, to sacrifice the rook like they did, and then recognize that this bishop is of equal or maybe even better strength than either of these black rooks. Okay. In the game, we had bishop d5, queen b2, rook a2, and, well, it's quite difficult to suggest something here now, because after king h2, we now have black coming up with their own tactics. Rook a7 was played, but this isn't best. What's best here is to actually take the bishop, removing the defender, and then scooping up the rook. So this could have been played right here. After king h2, rook takes bishop could be played, but instead rook a7 was played. Queen takes f6 was played instead, and now this is another... well, this is when black now goes in for this sacrifice on d5. Rook takes bishop, pawn takes rook, and now black in the end is what? Is up a full rook. So it appears black is going to win this one, but white still has a chance in this ending here. Just one moment here. You have to be very accurate, but white can get away with a perpetual. And I have no idea, of course, what the time situation was in this game. They weren't playing with very much time, 10 minutes, no increment. But there is a way to go forward with a perpetual here as white. They didn't come up with it. They played queen takes e5, and now this just allows black to get coordinated. Queen takes f2 isn't just going pawn hunting, but also stringing things together. The rook is now defended and not as vulnerable to some tactics with, you know, a check and then an attack of the rook. So queen f2 is fine and winning. But what should white do? White should take on e5 with check and can force that. So the draw here, the perpetual by white, is queen to h8, and after king here, queen takes e. If he goes back, well, we go back. So let's try something else, like king here. That's not working because of queen to b8, and the rook is picked up. So the king has to go here. And now we have queen to f5. And what do you do here as black? If king to d6, we can play queen f6. And what do you do? If you take the pawn, this allows a fork. There's almost always going to be some fork. If this rook remains unprotected, there's going to be some tactic, giving a check and attacking the rook when you have this queen on board. So queen f6, and what do you do as black? If you play to c5, you're actually getting mated on c6, so you can never really move forward to any of these two squares. In fact, when the queen is on this 6th rank, you have to go back. We give a check, we could give another check, and from here it's just constant checks wherever the king goes. If he's on the 7th rank, we go to the 7th. If he's on the 6th, we go to the 6th. If he's on the 8th, we go to the 8th and give a check. And if at any point he goes to the 5th rank here, he's going to end up getting mated. So, very interesting game. Don't know how long this recording is, but yeah, I found it quite interesting right from the get-go. This early point about the pawn structure, maintaining the tension is much better for white here. These details, you can do without h6 here. You don't have to be fearful of this convergence on the f7 square. You could get on with developing your bishop and then being one move away from castling and then having your rook there to defend on f7. I know it gets a little bit crazy in some lines, the knight harassing the black queen, black is in a fork and such, but black has their own ideas in mind with exploiting the white king position, as we saw with that one variation, the queen sweeping down and ripping the heart out of the white kingside structure. So those little details regarding the pawn structure, this h6 idea, some possibilities with b4, and also keeping in mind what are moves doing. A couple instances here I was drawing some attention to. What do moves do? What do they no longer do? Certainly it's opposite the queen, but it's no longer defending f7, seeing f7 as unprotected, seeing a move like knight to c5 as also unprotected, one attacker, one defender. There's tactics available at this very moment. Taking on f7, taking on c5, queen c4 with the fork. So, and what was another one right here at this moment, and this is certainly a finer point, which piece to look to reposition first? The one that's really doing absolutely nothing. The rook on a4 is the one who's doing absolutely nothing. So, yeah, some interesting things in this one for sure. Not really sure what more to add to this one, but I guess I'll close with how I normally do it. Feel free to leave any feedback to this video. It's always appreciated, and as usual, I hope you got something out of it. So that's all for now. Take care.